Yo, I'm sorting through some heinous haters like a pooper scooper. Jada's trying to take my life like a Koopa Trooper. I'm Double Mario, that mean I'm super. And I'm freaking dangerous like a Chupa Cabre.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG on the YouTube.com down there. We like magic. And today, got a deck for you as usual, and it's a semi-budget deck. It's only going to cost you about 75 bucks on TCG Player to build this thing. And it used to be a pretty popular archetype in Magic deck building philosophy, period. But it doesn't show up too much anymore. Today, I'm going to show you Mono Black Discard in Standard. That's right, it's not the 8-rack deck. And the 8-rack deck in Modern is about the only place we get to see discard decks anymore. But I'm actually of the opinion that we've got a critical mass of really good discard pieces in Standard. So many that we can't play them all. And we've got a good mid-range sort of in-game plan for the deck too. So I actually think the deck can do a lot of work for you. Let me go ahead and show you what I've got here. I'm going to start this one by talking about all the different things we have that make them discard cards. And that's like 21 different things, but that sounds like a lot, right? But in this deck, we get to play a lot of stuff that makes them discard cards and also does other things by Igby. We're going to start by playing 4 copies of Transgress the Mind, 4 copies of Collective Brutality, 2 copies of Lost Legacy, and 2 copies of Pick the Brain. Let me go ahead and get Transgress out of the way. It's just the best proactive removal in the format. Said it before, said it again. I truly believe it. Just Transgress is one of the reasons to play this deck and one of the best cards in the format. It's only 2 mana to get some of the most problematic cards you could ever come up against out of your opponent's hand, no matter what you're playing against. Gotta play all 4 copies of Transgress, no brainer. Collective Brutality is really, really good, and everyone knows that too. You know, not only can this be a discard spell mostly against control opponents, get removal, get counter spells out of their hand, but it can also be removal against small decks in the early game, which is great. That versatility is key. And hey, in a pinch, it can deal the last 2 damage to them, whatever. Can keep you in the game a little bit, you know, gain a little bit of life. There's so many uses for this, but mostly I like that it's great in the early game against control and functions as an on-theme discard thing. And against, you know, aggro decks, it's not a super dead card or anything. Even when you draw it late, it'll kill a small guy. So, love Collective Brutality and all the flexibility that it affords us. But the more interesting thing here is the decision to split the playset between Lost Legacy and Pick the Brain. Now, with Lost Legacy, you have to know exactly what your opponent is playing, you know, and that can sometimes be too easy to identify as early as turn 1. Sometimes it's not, and we want to be able to get cards out of their hand, ideally. Now, if you can get something out of their hand with Lost Legacy, you draw the card. That's pretty cool. But I want to almost, you know, virtually guarantee that we get a card out of their hand. And Pick the Brain can do that, even if we have no idea what our opponent is playing. So I'll split the play set here. You know, they both exile the cards. Lost Legacy can just tear up some decks, including, you know, combo decks like the Aetherworks Marvel deck or any of the other combo decks that people are playing in the format. It can tear up decks that want to just get to Emrakul as quickly as possible. So Lost Legacy is obviously great, and we'll play the 3rd of copy in the board. But I do want Pick the Brain to make sure that I always get something out of their hand. That's the important thing here. Now let's move on to some creatures here that can make them discard cards. We're going to play 2 copies of Distended Mindbender, 4 copies of Thought-Knot Seer, and 3 copies of Reality Smasher here. Now, Distended Mindbender is just phenomenal. I only want to play the 2 copies because we don't have all the creatures to emerge it to or anything. So there's that to consider. But Distended Mindbender can be a blowout on, you know, turn 4, turn 5, if you're able to play it that early. It can just be ridiculous. Get 2 cards out of their hand and put a huge 5/5 body on the battlefield. So Distended Mindbender obviously goes in, but I'm a little wary of playing the playset. Now, Thought-Knot Seer, another thing, by the way, that lets you pick a card out of their hand and just get rid of the best thing they're holding on to. And by the way, with something like Thought-Knot Seer in the deck, these turn sequences are available, like 2nd turn Transgress the Mind, 3rd turn Pick the Brain, 4th turn Thought-Knot Seer. That's just, you've gotten the 3 best cards out of their hand, and you've got a huge 4/4 guy on the battlefield. That's an insane turn sequence. And then you can follow it up next turn with Reality Smasher sometimes, and even if they have a removal piece in their hand to deal with the Reality Smasher, they might not have something else to discard. So by the time you play Reality Smasher, it'll be turn 5 or turn 6, and you may have decimated their hand entirely by that point, and they have no recourse for dealing with your 5/5 Trample Haste. And Thought-Knot Seer has a good body unto itself, and once it's done its job, it can just emerge in a Distended Mindbender. And even though they'll get to draw a card, you've still taken 3 cards out of their hand, 2 with the Mindbender and 1 with the Thought-Knot Seer, and again, just gotten all the best stuff. I like the way all these cards work together. I like the way they work on curve, too, by the way. And I like that they're all sort of ways to make your opponent discard on a stick. Usually, decks like this will use cards like the Rack, for instance, and other artifacts with static abilities like this that'll just ping them every turn and eventually win the game because they have no way to answer because they have no cards in their hand. We don't have an artifact like the Rack at all. We will get to something else that we're not playing, that some people might want to play. I have a little special part for that. But I think the best way to finish the game off here is to use these creatures that not only are on theme and make them discard cards, but are also huge bodily threats that give us a mid-game, end-game. That's a weird thing to say, but a mid-game, end-game. And let's finish off the creatures here, actually, with 3 copies of Wasteland Strangler and 3 copies of Asylum Visitor. Wasteland Strangler is another thing that affords a crazy turn sequence to us. We can always turn 2, Transgress the Mind, turn 3, Wasteland Strangler, kill a guy if they've played one, and then turn 4, we can just emerge the Wasteland Strangler for a Distended Mindbender. That turn sequence is unbelievable. I like Strangler a lot. A lot of our cards will exile cards rather than just straight up make them discard them. Exile is just great right now. Graveyard Shenanigans are horrible. And we get to play Wasteland Strangler, who is a solid body on the battlefield. Usually will kill a creature, especially in the early game when we need it to. That's important. And is a really good emerge target once it's done its job for a Distended Mindbender. So many good things about Strangler right now. Now, Asylum Visitor is a no-brainer for the deck. I don't know that I want to play all 4 of them, though, to be honest with you, especially after testing a little bit with this deck. I just don't think 4 is necessary, but 3 is probably where we want to be. The card is a good early game play, although we have our fair share of good early game plays on turn 2. But Asylum Visitor is still nice, and it's also good turn 4 next to a Collective Brutality. You know, we can Collective Brutality, kill a small guy, make them discard a card. We discard our Asylum Visitor and play it for its madness cost. So the synergy with Collective Brutality is real, and it's there. But the big thing here is that we can just draw cards once we've killed their hand. So that is the big advantage. We killed your hand, and now we're getting more card advantage than you. That is great. We also have to play a little bit of removal in this deck for when things slip through the cracks and hit the battlefield. So let's play 4 copies of Grasp of Darkness, 2 copies of Ruinous Path, and 2 copies of Obnixilis in this deck. Now, Grasp and Ruinous Path are just obvious choices. Grasp is some of the best removal in the entire format. Freaking amazing card, just yes to all of the Grasps. And 2 Ruinous Path, because if Planeswalkers hit the battlefield, we have to have some recourse for that. And it can kill a creature. And it can make it 4/4 land. Like, Ruinous Path is fine. Now, Obnixilis is also removal, but that's obviously not all he does. But unconditional removal is really, really good. But he also helps us get card advantage, which we will be wanting by this point in the game. It's just something that's going to deal damage every turn, guaranteed, and provide inevitability once we get the ultimate. Believe it or not, that's the entire main deck. Short, simple, and to the point. Lots of 3 and 4-ofs, and got a pretty strong game plan, actually. Turn 2 and 3, you're going to be making them discard cards, rip their hand away. Turn 4, 5, and 6, you're going to be playing a big threat that can also force them to discard cards. Things like Thought Not Seer, Reality Smasher, Distended Mindbender, these are all great because they're threats your opponent has to answer. But since we're making them discard cards, probably won't have the resources to answer. So, good, solid plan for this deck, to be honest with you. Plays fairly traditionally and has a decent mid-game plan. On to the lands here, and those are fairly simple, although we do want to make a bunch of colorless mana. Great opportunity to play Blighted Fin, yet another removal piece in the deck. And if you count Blighted Fin, we're playing quite a few removal pieces, you know. Grasp of Darkness, Ruinous Path, we're playing Obnixilis, we're playing Collective Brutality. If you want to count Transgress and all the other discard pieces as removal, you could probably do that. Blighted Fin kills creatures that are on the battlefield, so we're actually pretty set on removal in the deck. Corrupted Crossroads can cast something like 16 cards in the deck, so I figure it's worth playing. And that Crumbling Vestige, if you had a couple of bucks, you could just make that Aether Hub, and that would probably be a little bit better, but it's like, 20 cents for a playset of Crumbling Vestige. I'll stick with the Vestige for now. And here's a pretty important sideboard. A lot of this is just a who's who of cards that we didn't play that make them discard cards. Now, we do have some removal in there. Dead Weight, Sinister Concoction, and Flaying Tendrils are all against very specific decks. Sinister Concoction in there against Emrakul, and then Dead Weight and Flaying Tendrils against low-to-the-ground aggro decks that fill the board. But Harsh Scrutiny is also in there against those aggro decks that we want to have an answer for. Very, very early in the game. And the Scry is just great, by the way. Scry is one of the best parts of that card. But the rest, Whispers of Emrakul is pretty good against control. We will not often get the Delirium on it, but good against control because on turn 2, it's another way that'll give us really 10 ways to get something out of their hand on turn 2 against control before they have an opportunity to do anything about it. I really like Whispers. Vessel of Malignity is pretty good against the Delirium decks and the control decks for that matter. But you could, by the way, play Mind Rot, which is just straight up card disadvantage for our opponent. But Mind Rot in a format where Delirium matters an awful lot, I'm just not sure about. I think Vessel's probably the better choice. What about Creeping Dread? Why don't we play Creeping Dread in this deck? Because it is bad. The card is bad. I talked earlier about the rack a couple of times. It's in that case it's an artifact that just sits on the battlefield and provides some form of inevitability, doing damage to our opponent. Cards like Megrim have also been in this slot in discard decks before. Every time they discard a card, they take 2. Hey, that's a way we can finish the game, especially if we get a couple of them out. We don't have an enchantment like that, other than maybe Creeping Dread. But the problem with Creeping Dread is kind of in a way like Megrim's problem. Mostly because by the time Creeping Dread starts to matter, we've ripped everything out of their hand or they've played all the cards in their hand. So by the time our upkeep rolls around every turn, they'll have played the card that they top decked. And it's just going to make us discard a card if we have any. It's just not great at all. And even if they do have a card, it's not guaranteed that they'll discard the same type. So the card is very unreliable, costs a whole 4 mana, and there's a pretty easy way out of it once they start top decking cards, because they're going to play the card they draw pretty much every turn anyway. And here are your power rankings right here. Final score of 61, which is pretty good, even though I feel like the score is deflated on our system. It's not... it just doesn't do very well in our categories. It's not super speedy. It's not hella offensive minded. It's not very synergistic or anything. It's middle of the road in these categories. But the deck is actually really versatile and has good game against a bunch of different things. We really need to shape up against aggro in games 2 and 3. That is one of our worst matchups. But against some of the best decks in the format, a lot of these control decks that are floating around right now, even Blue-White Flash and especially Green-Black Delirium, considering how many of our cards exile cards, we actually have pretty good game, and those are some of the best decks in the format right now. And you've probably already got a lot of these cards because they've been out for a while. Transgress the Mind is important, and you should have picked up your copies by now. Thought Not Seer's been out forever. Reality Smasher's been out forever. And they'll stay standard legal for a while. In case you missed it, Wizards recently announced that they're changing the rotation schedule again. The 6-month schedule was way, way too short for most players, and they heard a lot of people say that. And they decided to extend it once again. So once Amonkhet comes out, Oath of the Gatewatch and Battle for Zendikar will not rotate out like they were previously planned to. So they'll stick around for longer than we expected, meaning that all of these cards from those sets will be around for longer, meaning the deck is a little bit more comfortable to play because, you won't lose all the cards in just a few months. That's all I've got for now. Let me know how you feel about this one down there in the comments section. I really, really like this deck, but that's because I've always liked discard decks, and it's a little sad that there's not really a place for one in Standard. Or is there? I think this deck actually could be pretty darn good. Try it out on mtgo or whatever service that you use. Proxy it up in paper. Build it if you got the cards. Chances are you probably do. Deck is not that hard to build, to be honest with you. So try this thing out. Let me know how you feel. Take to the comments and let me know how you change it if you would. But what are we doing next time? Well, this time I did a long-forgotten archetype that used to be really popular and important in Magic, but it's not anymore. Next time, I'm going to do that again with a standard deck. So I want you to take to the comments and let me know what deck you think it's going to be. A deck that used to be a very important, very often seen archetype that was really just on the list of basic Magic deck archetypes. But it's not anymore as far as standard play goes. What do you think it's going to be? And one more thing, by the way, that I want you to tell me in the comments. A lot of people actually, have said that they like the new camera, they like the new audio, but they're not sure about the backdrop. So I've got some ideas here. I could always just bring in the Fear and Loathing poster from the living room. Could do that. I'm thinking about putting other posters and stuff up. I'm thinking about just stenciling SBMTG in all the different colors onto the backdrop. And I'm also thinking of just covering it in Magic cards. So there's a bunch of different options that I'm considering for this backdrop. Just let me know if you have any ideas or if you liked any of those ideas, let me know. So see there, you should hit the like button because I value your opinion so much. And I really do, by the way. I want you guys to enjoy what you're watching, so I value your opinion. But hit the like button, thumbs it up, and subscribe if you're new. And I will see you guys later. I'm Deb from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards. End card. Here's an end card for you. We're doing that now.